So my name is Red Miller. I am your facilitator today for this session. We have shadow facilitator Rihanna, who is also joining us. This presentation is going to be presented by Professor Linda Sweet, and we also have a backup facilitator, Dr. Videnka Valensky, sorry. And she is going to be there in case anything happens to Professor Linda's connection. So let's get started with an introduction. Many of you know already Professor Linda. She is a midwife and a nurse with a broad experience in clinical environments, education, management, and research. She is the inaugural chair in midwifery with Deakin University and the Western Health Partnership. Linda is a life member of the Australian College of Midwives, a fellow of the Australian and New Zealand Association of Health Professors, Educators, and a Flinders University Distinguished Scholar. Linda has over 170 peer-reviewed publications and is the deputy editor of the international journal Women and Birth. Linda is passionate about the midwifery profession and improving maternity care. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us today. Linda, over to you.
No problem. Thank you, Red. And thank Rihanna as well for both facilitating this session today. It's wonderful to meet you both. And I'd like to congratulate and extend my thanks to the VIDM Organising Committee, and particular Liz, for all of the technical support to gather us all around the world to be able to share our work and meet and greet each other through these systems. So as mentioned, my name's Linda Sweet. I'm presenting today on behalf of a team of people. It's not just my work. Before I do, I'd like to acknowledge the lands on which this work was done. So in Australia, we often will thank the traditional owners of the lands. In this case, the research was done on Wurundjeri land. So I'd like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and their past, present, and emerging elders. I'm presenting today on my beautiful holiday in the Whitsunday Islands. I completely forgot when I put in the abstract that it was during my holiday. So we were just having plenty of backup options just in case my internet was no good. So my colleague Dinka is in Melbourne, and she will pop in and participate in the conversation at the end or the discussions, depending on what questions come up, etc. So this research was initiated by a small group of midwifery group practice midwives, in particular Kath and Tia and Fika, or Kath and Tia were the MGP midwives. Fika was a migrant woman who's a midwife at the Western Health where we work. And we were supported by the assistance of Shukriya. Shukriya is a community health worker, and she helped with coordination and recruitment of the participants for this work. The midwives initiated they approached Duncan and I with their concern that they believed refugee women were not receiving the standard of care that they should, given their different backgrounds and circumstances and languages spoken. So we set about to see whether or not that was true. Next slide, Red. So the United Nations Refugee Agency recognises a refugee as any person owing to a well-founded fear of being persecuted for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group or political opinion, is outside the country of his or her nationality and is unable, or owing to fear is unwilling, to avail themselves of the protection of their home country. So by the end of 2017, in Australia, there were 25.4, by the end of 2017, there were 25.4 million refugee men, women, and children registered across the world. That's about the entire population of Australia that are recognised as being refugee people. Next slide. So here we've got a chart that was created by the Refugee Council of Australia. These figures, however, mix refugees and migrants, and it was really difficult to differentiate the two, because a migrant may be someone coming that's a skilled worker. Let's say the midwife from the UK comes and works in Australia, they're a migrant. But in particular, we wanted to look at refugee people that had been displaced and therefore suffered, previous trauma, etc. So these figures mix refugees and migrants. And so the skilled migrant visas are the largest population. You can see the dark blue are the skilled migrants. The orange parts of the graph demonstrate family. So if you've got someone who's got Australian residency, they can apply to bring their family across as migrants to join them in Australia. And so the refugee visa appropriate is the humanitarian visa, and that's the light green one. So you can see the vast majority are in New South Wales and Victoria, followed up by Queensland and South Australia. Those names of those places, they're the states and territories of Australia. And so most are residing in New South Wales and Victoria, and for Duncan and I work in Victoria. Next slide, please. So we wondered how big the local refugee population was. So from our perinatal birthing outcome data, we were given an estimate of an annual, at our hospital, an annual estimate of a birth rate of 6,500 people per year. A little over 3,000 would be considered to be migrants or refugees. So we think, given the number of the humanitarian visas versus the migrant visas, we estimated that Western Health were providing services to 200 to 300 women of migrant backgrounds per year. So that's a huge number of people, of women. The refugee status, however, is not routinely collected, and so we can't really be confident. That figure is based on the number of visas provided and the number of births we have at our hospital. But because we don't routinely collect it, and some women may not declare it because of fear of ramifications. Next slide, please. So this what I'm presenting today is part of a multi-method approach where we did a survey of staff that provide maternity care to refugee women in our service, and we went out and spoke to refugee women about their experiences of maternity care. So in addition to the perspectives, we looked at staff perceptions and confidence in caring for women, and that paper will be is being drafted as currently at the moment. So hopefully we'll be able to go for peer review soon. This presentation focuses on the women's perspective. So our aim was to explore the culturally specific maternity care experiences of women from refugee backgrounds and to consider ways to improve that care. We used a qualitative descriptive approach using focus groups. So we conducted 4 focus groups in the end, and we conducted them in 3 different language groups. So Oromo, which is predominantly people from Ethiopia, Dinka, and Arabic. So Arabic speaking women that could obviously come from multiple different countries. The focus groups were co-facilitated by at least 1, if not 2 members of the research team, as well as Shukriya, the bicultural worker. And we also had an interpreter in attendance. That allowed women to choose whether or not they wanted to speak in English or whether they wanted to speak in their native language. All discussions were audio recorded and professionally transcribed, and analysis of the transcripts were thematically analysed. We also had, in consideration that these women were likely to have more than 1 child, or we wanted them to obviously at least have had 1 child, we employed a childcare worker to come and care for their children during the focus group so that they didn't feel they couldn't come because they didn't have babysitters. We provided light refreshments. However, in 3 of the groups, the women ended up buying their own foods and sharing because they didn't like the Australian snacks that we provided in the first focus group, which I think is entertaining. So the Dinka people are Sudan and South Sudanese. Yeah, okay, next slide. We recruited from the community to gather experiences of care across a range of health service. We didn't recruit specifically from our health service because there are, about 6 major maternity services across in metropolitan Melbourne, or 3 primary tertiary care providers. So there were a mix of languages spoken throughout the focus group discussion. Some women were comfortable to speak in English while others did not. Translation, therefore, of the interviews, of the focus groups is not actually verbatim for what the women said, because when they would speak in their native language, the interpreter would then give us a very abridged version of what they said. Oh yeah, she agrees with that other woman, rather than telling us exactly how she described agreement. So that's something that we've learned about using interpreters for data collection. An abridged version of the key points were made by women. So sometimes if it wasn't the interpreter, it might have been another study participant who would have said, oh, what she was trying to describe was. So they were helping each other throughout the conversation. At times when they felt the details were missing in the translation, they added further detail, which prompted vibrant and engaged ongoing discussions without us even having to ask further questions. They would then go and discuss further the topics areas that the previous woman had mentioned. So 31 women participated in all, but all had had at least one pregnancy and birth in Australia. Some of them had birth in their homeland before they came to Australia as well. Key themes that we created included communication, which underlies a subcategory, if you like, of miscommunication and racism, a loss of their traditional cultural traditions, and a desire for continuity of care. All of the women found maternity care in Australia generally satisfying and respectful. However, they did offer tangible ideas for improvement, which I'll discuss next. So the first theme, thanks, Fred, is communication, or as I said, miscommunication and racism. So the women spoke of the disparities in experiences based on whether they spoke English or not. Similarly, in one group, they felt their skin colour resulted in treatment and different treatment to white women. Other issues raised about African women having large families and judgmental comments about, we'll see you again next year, expecting that they'll get pregnant again. Whereas one said we should just be treated as all human beings and as mothers. So a Dinka woman said, a mother that doesn't speak English, she doesn't know the language and she doesn't know what's happening. People are just doing things to her body. And sometimes, you know, the hospital does not get interpreters. And some professionals, sometimes they just speak to the woman. She says yes. They're not like, no, she speaks good English just because she's saying yes. Another woman, Oromo woman, said they do not help you, especially when you don't speak English. There's one woman, she had had a baby there. Her husband needed to go home with his other daughter. Every time when she calls for help, they do not come to her because she doesn't speak English. And I think that's a really sad indictment because it was mentioned by a number of women, even though they generally felt their care was adequate and appropriate. Next slide, Red. The use of interpreters varied, and some women felt that they didn't want interpreters because there was fear of confidentiality breaches. They also said that whilst there's languages like Arabic, there's many different dialects and accents of Arabic. So they might have had an interpreter present or had experienced one previously, but not found them helpful because they didn't understand them, even though they theoretically spoke the same language. So an Arabic woman said, community workers that can speak your language. And if you trust, like, you know, trust is the big thing, you know. So they would use the community workers rather than an employed interpreter from a company.
We've lost you a bit, Linda.
Okay, any good now?
I hear you nice and strong still.
Okay, yeah, and because we don't want to use the people in our community because that person will go and talk. They might be fluent in Oromo, but she wants to use an alternate interpreter. It's not the same, so they'll still go for that. And again, from different tribes, we have our different accents. Next slide, please. So the women certainly wanted to be well informed and understood. So past experiences led them to approach with caution because they did not get to make autonomous decisions in previous birth experiences. And from different tribes, we have our different accents. So a Dinka woman said, I think for me, I think it would be like things explained properly and in detail, you know, in detail, because when you're like, so much was happening to my body. And another said, they took advantage of me being a first-time mum and me not knowing what my rights are. I feel she took advantage of that and not explaining to me the severity of what they've just done and the role they played in that. And the surgeon was like, your baby's big. I said, no. And the baby was 2.9 kilos. So that was used as a justification for an emergency cesarean section. Next slide. So effective communication, as we all know, is key to whether women felt respected or not. An Oromo woman said, some of the midwives, you feel like you can't even ask. It's like, it's not your house or you don't have the rights. Only they have a right and they will do what they want and you don't have a right to ask. Another said, and then people that are coming in and not telling you what what they're doing or who they are. And lastly, I've had friends, and the midwives have actually come when I'm there during the visiting hours just to check on them. They're very professional, very good. They just keep asking questions. How are you feeling? Are you feeling okay? How's the baby? Do you have any questions? Anything you need to ask? So that's a positive example where effective communication was useful for that particular woman. Next slide, please. The second theme was loss of cultural traditions. So the Arabic women said they no longer followed traditions as they'd assimilated into Australian society, which I think is interesting. Participants certainly spoke of the preference for female staff, and that was across all focus groups. So an Arabic woman said, depending on where you come from, which village, which surrounding, they want a female instead of male doctor. The postnatal cultural practices were seen to be by most to be the most important, rather than anything antenatally. So they but like culturally, we're just meant to kind of sit and have various cultural foods so that our body is relaxed and goes through those things. Traditionally, the families or the relatives, they make that porridge and the soup as well, because they feel that it makes the milk come quickly. So yeah, they usually make it, the women from the community. And of course, in hospitals, we don't normally provide that kind of thing. Cultural traditions, but it's different. You know, there are different traditions in Iraq, and different religions have different customs. So there isn't any one specific practice, if you like, that they wanted to recommend. And certainly lastly, about women not taking a bath for a few days, 3 days or something like that. And of course, in Australia, they're up and showered within hours of birth, most commonly. Next slide, Red. So continuity of care. Participants spoke of their desire for continuity of care. They spoke of their past trauma, and then the desire not to need to re-describe that to every new appointment or new staff member that they were cared for. So that, you know, they talk about the lady did not have a choice. Every time a different midwife. Same with her now. So this is talking about a friend of hers who was unable to get into a continuity service. And a Dinka woman said, like, you know, you're not lucky. There's a waiting list for the caseload midwives now. So it's not easy to get one. You need to be on a waiting list. And then by the time you're coming off the waiting list, it's just like 1 or 2 more appointments. So, you know, just to build that rapport with them. And then you feel more comfortable. You feel like they know your story, because every time, like, you don't have to retell your story. It would have been very frustrating for those women in the early months of their pregnancy care. Next slide, Red. So what women want, they want clear communication that enables them to have that ability for autonomous decision making. They want to choose what happens to them, rather than just being a receptacle for things to occur. They certainly want respectful care, and generally, in most cases, they did feel that the majority of their care was respectful. They certainly wanted and valued continuity of care. A lot of the women didn't even know what that was. And they said, oh, that would be amazing if we could have the same midwife through every appointment. In the centre that I work at, they do try and prioritise refugee women, but as I said earlier, not all women will self-identify, and you don't want to make judgments on whether you think someone is or isn't. It's a sensitive question to ask. But certainly without continuity of care, they really wanted more flexible appointment scheduling. So many of the women missed appointments because they didn't have transport, or they had other children in their care and couldn't take them with them. Whereas if they could choose the best time and day of their appointment for them, they felt that they would be able to attend more regularly. Next slide, please. So recently there's been a paper written, What Do Women in Australia Want from the Maternity Care, a scoping review. So the reference is up there. And what I've done here, I've replicated their model that came out of the scoping review. And each one that's been circled in red was certainly evident in our data. So cultural sensitivity, involving a support person, and respect, being safe. Continuity of carer, as well as continuity of care. Personalised care, access, being seen and heard. And then also being enabled through effective communication, information provision, and autonomy to make choice. Next slide. So addressing cultural misconceptions and combating racism within healthcare settings is imperative to create a welcoming and inclusive environment for refugee women. Healthcare workers should certainly undergo cultural competence training to recognise the challenges and challenge the biases that may impact their care. Now, cultural training in Australia is very common for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women, but it's very less common for women of other nationalities, and certainly not for refugees. They want effective communication, accommodating linguistic diversities, and cultural nuances need to be prioritised. So this includes providing interpreter services when needed and employing culturally competent staff who understand traditions, beliefs and practices of diverse communities. We're very lucky at Western Health. We have quite a range of midwives that are not born in Australia. So a lot of them come from these other countries. So often they're called upon to give advice. Last slide, please. So this paper at the moment is half written, hasn't gone in for peer review as yet, but it will hopefully go out in the next month or two. So we do hope to get it published. But we certainly want to acknowledge the amazing and caring midwives who initiated the project, the bicultural workers who championed the study for us, particularly Shukriya, and encouraged women to come and share their stories. The women obviously who generously shared their stories, and they shared stories of their birth in their home countries as well as birth in Australia. I've only presented data where they're talking about birth in Australia because that was the aim of the study. And certainly thank the interpreters who assisted in data collection and the childcare workers. And that's brought me to the end of my presentation.
Thank you so much, Linda, for sharing that. Wow, it's really impressive to hear the numbers, the way that you presented, how many women are affected by this and how important it is that we start to understand a little bit about the challenges that they're facing within the system. If you have chats, questions for Linda, please put them in the chat and we can answer those for you.
The work when they were doing all the drilling has gone now, so that's good.
Oh, good. We didn't hear any drilling. So
no, I went out the back, so I was as far away as possible.
Liz, sadly, both personal and institutional discrimination and racism.
Mm.
Rihanna,
and I
agree
think for
that
us it's about just raising the awareness that we have a very good maternity system in Australia and we think we do amazing care. But clearly there's still variances where we've got possibilities to improve, or requirements to improve.
Mm-hmm. Well, you think about how, I mean, all over the world, even navigating the system is hard, even if you're from that culture and you speak the language, right? So it's amazing how much more challenge it is for these women. I agree that respect. Sorry?
No, you're right, Liz, keep going.
I agree that respecting a client's decisions is essential. I'm aware that certain beliefs or religions may oppose specific midwifery practices. However, how can maternity care providers gain a deeper understanding of diverse cultural practices and show respect for them without compromising clinical safety or standards of care? Great question.
So Dinka, do you want to jump in and have any additional comments?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Rahana. I think it comes back to that woman-centered care, person-centered care, and just finding out from the woman what her story is and what her needs and preferences are. There is some great, as Linda mentioned in the presentation, there's a great culturally specific training available, but it's not going to cover every culture or every particular need for a particular woman. So I think when we go back to the woman, just finding out from her what her preferences are. And I think, again, that comes back to the continuity of care, where you've got greater opportunity to find out those things as opposed to when care is fragmented and can't develop that relationship. So it seems that these women need to be prioritised in that model of care and have greater access to it.
I was curious.
A minute ago. No.
Yeah, I saw that hand go back down. So please don't be shy. Put your hand up, and we're really happy to unmute you and hear your voice. Okay, let's have a look. Okay, I'm gonna unmute you, Keenan, and you can ask your question.
Hello, first of all, I want to say that Happy International Day of the Midwives from Indonesia. My name is Kinda. I have a question for you, Linda. So where I live in the local Papua, like black mom with the curly hair, something like that. And as a midwife in here, sometimes they talking very rude with another ethnic. So as a midwife, it's really hurt my feeling. So if in the future I want to conduct the qualitative research, should I include the same ethnic with them, or I just go by myself?
Your question was cutting in and out a lot for me. If I'm understanding correctly, you're talking about postnatal care and whether or not you should take someone that's, culturally or linguistically similar to the woman. Is that the question, Sinan? I think I'll assume it is. There's no point there. I think it's a matter of respecting what the woman wants. If you can go as a midwife and provide her care and it's appropriate and
Are you able to
and
write it
they're
in the
happy.
chat, Kenan? Might be easier to.
But certainly, if the woman wants a support person with her at any point in time, that should be a person of her choice.
That's what I was gonna ask as well, how often you see that women are coming in with someone from their community as their interpreter, or someone that speaks English, an aunt, or I've even seen where they bring in an older child who maybe speaks English. Is that something that is encouraged within the system?
I think in Australia, generally, anyone can bring a support person with them, and it's up to the woman and the care provider to agree that they can sit in on consultations. I think one of the challenges, this was done a little bit just post-COVID as well, so there were areas or opportunities where they couldn't have support people with them, being their most recent experiences. But certainly I don't do clinical work, so if there's a midwife who's actually clinical on the ground, maybe they would like to help respond to that question, either in the chat or put their hand up. Because it's
Okay,
not
thank you, Linda.
unique to our service, it's every
Thank
service.
you, Linda. Thank you, Linda. I appreciate it.
Keenan, was that the response to your question that you were looking for? Or did
Well,
you?
I heard that Linda is not clinical midwife, so maybe she cannot answer my question.
Do you want to ask your question again or try to type it in the chat if that's easier?
No, it's enough for me. Thank you, Linda.
Okay, thank
Thanks,
you.
Sinan.
Okay, any other questions?
I think the question about having a support person interpret, I think from a hospital policy perspective, it's not seen as appropriate because, the quality of translation, and as you said, when a child comes in on an appointment, it brings in other ethical issues as well. So preferably an interpreter. But in our study, it was found that was an issue as well because some women knew the interpreters. So there was a worry about confidentiality, or the interpreter didn't necessarily understand their dialect. So there definitely needs to be work done in that area to ensure women get the right interpreters and to ensure that their confidentiality is not compromised because they know who the interpreter is, or even if they don't, just by the fact that they're part of the same community, they feel a sense of lack of trust because they're not sure where that information might go.
Yeah, it's a really complex puzzle.
I would like to ask one more question, Linda. Okay.
Have we lost Linda?
No, I'm here.
No, she's there. I see her.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Go ahead, Rihanna.
Okay, I would like to ask, especially in Australia, how the maternity service handle women's preference for female staff or interpreters. Like, is it possible in Australia? Because here in Indonesia, we can do that.
end of, I just track it on the end of it. So do Australia, the women get the opportunity to do which?
Have
Preferred
female-
interpreter.
Oh,
The female,
interpreter.
I think
Or
the
female
question was
doctor?
if they have a female care provider or also a female interpreter, if that's an option.
Yes, both of us.
I don't think the interpreters, they get a choice. It depends who's available, but I'm not 100% confident of that. With regard to female doctors in Australia, we actually have now about 50% of our obstetricians are female. So they have a very good chance, but it's no guarantee. Certainly anyone in theory can, refuse to be seen by somebody, but it would be probably uncommon, I would think.
Yeah, and the majority of midwives in Australia are female. So, if the if the doctor is if they don't need to see a doctor, they're likely to have a midwife who is female. So from that perspective, but if they require more specialist care, I'm not sure how much choice they have with that in the public system.
Yeah, certainly if it's private, they choose their own professional, of course. Rhiannon, we've probably got about 98, 99% midwives in Australia are female. Very, very few males.
Oh, very possible. Okay. Thank you, Linda.
Bupe.
Okay, I think we have one last question. Bupe has raised her hand, so I have unmuted you. You should be able to speak.
Oh yeah, so this is Bupe, and it's not a question per se, it's just a contribution towards the preference of a female practitioner for women. And in my clinical work, like I work casually in the hospitals, and yeah, there have been moments when we have Muslim women, and for Muslim women, they always prefer a female midwife, and yeah, we always go by their preference. You can't, we do have like a few males, but if in our team, whenever we're doing team midwifery, and in our team, most of the time, like I always have a male. And if a woman says, my preference is not to have any male because I'm Muslim, it is always done. Like a male person, like won't even go in closer to that room, and so other midwives who are female will be the ones handling whichever issues and concerns that the woman has. Yeah, so it's done. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. And which country did you say you're in, Bupe?
I'm in Australia, Sydney, New South Wales.
Oh, you're in Sydney. Okay, yeah, amazing. Thank you for that contribution.
You're welcome.
Okay. Is there any final hanging thoughts before we close off this session for today? Now is your chance.
Besides the content knowledge that we've gained from this, what I've described so far and what will come out in the staff surveys, the other big learning for us was using interpreters in research, because the women spoke an awful lot more words than we got interpreted back to us. So that was a challenge.
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, wonderful presentation. Thank you so much, Linda.